Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Estrella, and I'm speaking to you from Madrid, Spain. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this online festival for the invitation to participate. In this short talk, I will focus on the role of women artists of the Russian avant-garde in the Moscow ВХУТЕМАСe pedagogy. So this talk revises the birth and evolution of ВХУТЕМАСe as a modern design school through the lives and work of 5 women: Alexandra Exter, Nadezhda Udaltsova, Olga Rozanova, Lyubov Popova, and Barbara Stepanova, commonly known as the Amazons of the Russian avant-garde. Their social and economic position allowed some of them to start their artistic career in what was then the center of artistic activity in the West, Paris. There they were immersed in the provocative and insurgent spirit of the avant-garde groups of the beginning of the century, and with their returning to their country, they participated in the social vocation and spirit of the early years of the revolution. The recent work of those years, which was projected into the pedagogy of ВХУТЕМАСe, was celebrated and recognized at the International Exhibition of Modern Industrial and Decorative Art in Paris in 1925. Therefore, we could say that our story begins in Paris toward the beginning of the 20th century and ends again in Paris in 1925. The foundation of ВХУТЕМАСe meant not only the appearance of one of the first modern schools of design, but also the birth of a new type of professional capable of breaking with the existing tradition. ВХУТЕМАSe, like its German contemporary, the Bauhaus, became the center of a new language and a powerhouse in the development of a new generation of artist designers. One of its achievements was the creation of a new teaching methodology different from those known at the time and based on the experiments and theories of the avant-garde artists. The school ВХУТЕМАSe had among its teachers the most relevant figures of the Russian avant-garde, among whom were several women who played a fundamental role in the teaching at the school and the development of the pedagogical programs. Specifically, 7 of the 57 teachers identified as the most relevant in ВХУТЕМАSe were women. These were Anna Golovkina, Alexandra Exter, Nadezhda Udaltsova, Lyubov Popova, Vera Mukhina, Barbara Stepanova, and Oksana Pavlenko. An 8th woman, Olga Rozanova, played a crucial role in the educational reforms, although she didn't teach because she died just before the creation of the new institution. The variety of projects that this woman undertook reflects their multidisciplinary nature, which was a common feature of avant-garde artists. In addition to their work as painters, in which a certain interest in the study of color can be highlighted, and we can see the works here of Alexandra Exter, Nadezhda Udaltsova, and Olga Rozanova, and also the works of Popova, Stepanova, and Oksana Pavlenko, or their work as sculptors. In the case of Anna Golovkina and Vera Mukhina, many also designed ceramics, fabrics, or clothing. Exter, Mukhina, Popova, and Stepanova worked on costume and stage design for significant and varied theatrical production. Rozanova also experimented with transrational poetry and Stepanova with photomontage and photography. And here we can see the work of some of them in the field of fashion design, also in the field of custom design, Popova, Stepanova, Mukhina, and Exter, and also in stage design. In this talk, I will focus mainly on the work of 5 of them: Alexandra Exter, Nadia Alsova, Olga Rosanova, Lyubov Popova, and Barbara Stepanova. Even though the proportion of female teachers and students was a minority compared to that of men, they work inequally with their male colleagues. Furthermore, although the October Revolution recognized many rights for women, it would not be correct to assume their inclusion in the staff of ВХУТЕМАСe on this fact. All of them were already well-known figures before the revolution and had participated in different national and international exhibitions. And here we can see some pictures of different classes of students of ВХУТЕМАСe, which was the name adopted by ВХУТЕМАСe around 1927, and it's interesting to analyze in them the proportion of female students and teachers. So in this photo we can distinguish the proportion of female students in the theatrical decoration section of painting faculty in 1927. And in this other, the proportion of female students and professors of the textile faculty in 1928. So, although the position of Exter, Uralsova, Rosanova, Popova, and Stepanova allowed them to study, and in case of Exter, Popova, and Uralsova, to travel and train abroad, women's access to higher education was not too uncommon among people with certain economic resources in Russia at that time. At the end of the 19th century, women had finally gained access to universities, so when our protagonists decided to study, there were already several previous generations of women who had paved the way for them. In some ways, this seemed contradictory to the socio-economic context of early 20th century Russia, where only 40 years early feudalism had disappeared. The vast majority of the population still lived in the countryside, and patriarchy was the cornerstone of communal life. The 5 women knew one another, and some even were friends. All, except Barbara Stepanova, were born in the 80s and belonged to families with resources and good economic positions. Stepanova, on the other hand, was born in 1894 into a working-class family. They all began their lives in the provinces and, after learning their trade in various Russian art schools, continued their careers in Moscow. Exter, Popova, and Uralsova traveled around Europe before the First World War and were in Paris at different times. They studied and knew different European artistic movements, as we can see in their works from that time. Exter made the acquaintance of Picasso, Braque, and Apollinaire and other members of the avantgarde, and would become a key figure in the connection between the Russian avant-garde and the artistic currents that were developing in the French capital. Popova and Uralsova studied together at the Académie de la Palette in Paris with Metzinger and Le Fauconnier. During their stays abroad, they came into contact with the artistic currents of the time, such as Cubism or Futurism, which they would later interpret in their own way. The same thing would happen with Rosanova, which would become one of the first defenders of non-figurative art within the avant-garde of her country. After October Revolution in 1917 and the Bolsheviks coming to power, the new Soviet socialist state undertook the task of building the new society it had announced. Lenin had enumerated that the basis for socialist construction should mainly the electrification of the country and the construction of heavy industry. Culture, education, and propaganda, both in and out of academia, played a fundamental role in this process. It was not enough to train technicians capable of facing the new task. It was also essential to make a population, mostly peasant, aware of the benefits of these transformations. The regime not only wanted to increase the number of goods produced, but also to improve their quality, training artists to work closely with the manufacturing sector. It was therefore necessary to consider new reforms and educational programs adapted to this objective as soon as possible. Many avant-garde artists were linked into the new political project and were involved in the cultural transformation of the country. As a result of the first stage of the reform of art education, the old art academies and applied art schools were dissolved, and these VHUTEMAS, or State Free Art Studios, emerged. The Moscow's VHUTEMAS replaced the Stroganov School of Applied Art, that would become the first State Free Art Studio, and the School of Painting, Sculpture and Architecture, that could become the second State Free Art Studio. Olga Razumova played a significant role in their organization, although she died at the end of that same year, 1918, when this VHUTEMAS has just been formed. The creation of the State Free Art Studios of this VHUTEMAS meant the popularization of education, the search for alternative teaching models, and the creation of a space in which all artistic movements were represented.